give a warm welcome to the hosts of the Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. My name is Brennan Klein. I am your ghost for the evening. I don't know. This is an impression of nothing. I'm just...
I was going to wait until you were done with it. It feels like Transylvania real estate auctioneer might have been the vibe you were trying to make happen.
Yeah, going once, going twice, and it's your co-ghost, Tim Brayton. How are you doing today, Tim?
I am hanging in there. I'm doing very well. New Year has greeted the Midwest, as you have perhaps heard, with a very thick blanket of snow, followed by a very thin blanket of air that's not going anywhere. I need to kill that metaphor off, but it's cold. It's real cold.
Okay, yes.
It's like murder your lungs by stepping out into the air cold.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear this. Okay, I'm going to sound very dumb for a moment.
Yes.
Is Ohio the Midwest?
That's a question that we could spend the entire podcast delving into. It doesn't say in my heart that it's the Midwest, but I think you have to work really, really hard to define the Midwest and not have Ohio in it. I think the fair thing to do is to say that Ohio is the easternmost extension of the Midwest.
Okay, great. So in that case, that is the closest interaction I've had with the Midwest. Because I went to Cincinnati, I was tagging along when my ex went to an academic conference there. Because otherwise, why would you do it? But we ended up arriving in Cincinnati on the first day of spring, and when I tell you, there was a palpable sense of relief among the civilians of Cincinnati that we could feel, not having just survived the winter that they got through. So I do, that is as close as I can get to feeling your pain, but it sounds awful.
It is. And I have two responses. One is to say that you've merely kicked the can down from why did you go to Cincinnati to why would you tag along to your boyfriend's academic conference? Because that sounds about as fun as like saying, this was such a good trip to the dentist. Can I go again in 2 months rather than 6? And B, Lord love the people of Ohio. I'm sure that their winters are absolute agony. They're sort of the butthole of the Great Lakes. So all that snow that's just kind of wailing down Superior through Ontario, etc., just kind of plops onto them. But I will see their Ohio winters, and I will raise them at Wisconsin winters.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure it's worse. But I'm just saying that's as close as I can get to a minuscule appreciation of what you're going through.
Sure.
And I would just tag along to whatever conference he went to. I would only attend his essay reading and then fuck off and let him do academic stuff and just wander around a new city.
Wander around picturesque Cincinnati.
Yeah. I just, I like to explore a new place. Cincinnati was not. It was very brown.
I have to watch what I say. I have friends who I believe listen to the show and my friend is from a city in Ohio, and I'm fairly confident it's the suburbs of Cincinnati. It might be the suburbs of Cleveland, but I don't think so. So we love you and we love where you come from. Sorry, Zev.
Look, Cincinnati was very kind to me. They withheld the sun for longer than I was expecting, but I did appreciate it. The sun didn't rise till it felt like it was 10 a.m. by the time the sun was peeking over the horizon. And I'm like, there's no hills. Where is it hiding? But also there was no traffic. I mean, honestly, coming from LA, I was like, these are the two things I hate the most about LA. So it really solved those problems for me.
Sure.
And yeah, anyway, that's Cincinnati talk for the day. Get your next dose of that on the next episode of Bride of Alternate Ending, with our our weekly updates on how I feel about Cincinnati, bi-weekly, and by that I mean twice a week. Anyway, I've lost the plot. We are here with the second episode of January. In January, we like to take a look back on what we've done in the previous year, do a little bit of following up during our Oscars Skeletons Month last year in honor of Ana de Armas being nominated for Blonde, a movie I'm sure you all remember fondly. We watched 2015's Eli Roth movie Knock Knock, which was a remake of 1977's Death Game. So that is what we are watching and discussing today.
It is. And apparently it is, in fact, the second remake of Death Game, although the more quote-unquote official, and that Death Game had the blessing of 3 of the principal creators. I'm sorry, Knock Knock had the blessing of 3 of the principal creators of Death Game.
Yes. Because are you talking about there was like a Spanish language remake?
Yes.
And also, in my research, I uncovered that Death Game seems to be a remake of the 1973 movie Teenage Innocence. So it's a real Star is Born situation.
We're just gonna get back until we find out that in fact, in the long run, Death Game is based on workers leaving the Lumiere factory.
Yeah, no, it's a real tangled web we weave. So maybe next year we'll do Teenage Innocence in January.
I hope that we just keep chipping away at this until we find the text.
Mm-hmm. It just written in Sanskrit on a stone tablet. The story of Death Game. It was. Never mind. I'm done. But yes, it's not a complex story. Maybe that's why it's so easy to retell.
I was going to say, I feel like at this point you could just edit in when we talked about the story from the Knock Knock episode, and then we can just skip ahead to talking about the film, because the story takes very few words to describe, and I think it is identical between the two films.
Yeah, it is roughly identical. Eli Roth did beef up some of the like taboo nature of the things that they do to him, but not considerably so. He just kind of Eli Rothed it a little bit. He zhuzhed it. I would say, in particularly in between 2 and 3 moments that are substantially different in terms of just the text of what action they perform upon him.
The moments, it's a little bit rougher. Some of the dialogue has been tweaked a bit. I think the overall attitude the Roth film has towards its characters is different, but at the level of incident, at the level of give me a 4-sentence description, I think the 4-sentence description would be awfully similar.
Yes. So,
although I will have to point out, I was not a fan of Eli Roth when we recorded that episode, and now I am a fan of Eli Roth because he made what I would consider to be his best ever movie.
Oh,
in
yes.
the intervening 11 months. So
Thanksgiving, which I don't think I disagree.
I know you weren't as hot on Thanksgiving as I was.
I was not as hot on Thanksgiving, but I also do not like Eli Roth, so I think I'm still with you. Although I think Thanksgiving might be on the level of the Green Inferno for me.
Which I have not seen.
Oh, okay.
The idea of Eli Roth remaking Cannibal Holocaust sounds like one of those I like the dentist so much I'm gonna go again tomorrow type situations. Yeah. So I
did not hate the Green Inferno. I don't know that you would. I haven't seen Cannibal Holocaust, largely on your recommendation.
It's a pip.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
But yeah, that movie didn't necessarily bother me. I think it's the one where his kind of puerile sensibility actually kind of worked because it was such a specific kind of throwback to a very specific thing that was kind of on his wavelength.
Okay.
But anyway, Death Game 1977. This movie, it's very simple. Seymour Cassell is George Manning. He is the good old dad of a
you can't start giving me flashbacks this quick into the process, Brent.
We will get into what that is, but the Chiron reads San Francisco, October 10th, 1975. Even though he clearly lives in Marin County, like they have to cross the Golden Gate Bridge to get into the city. Also, his house is luxurious. There's a breakfast sequence where there is a candelabra on the table. They're rich as piss. Anyway,
you never had breakfast with Liberace?
No, I can't say that I have. Although Breakfast with Liberace is a documentary I would watch.
It's whatever piece of media comes under that title is one I would engage with. Yes,
very much. But anyway, so he's like your quote unquote typical suburban dad, typical in the Love Simon sense, where he's like, "I'm just like you," while his parents hand him a car.
A fucking big ass car, too.
Yeah. But anyway, so his kids are just off visiting their grandparents, I guess. They're just nowhere to be seen. He's having a very portentous and kind of woozily shot game of croquet with his wife.
Wow. Can we start talking form yet, or do we want to get through the plot first?
I'll get through the plot. It's so easy. It's so easy.
It's so easy. It's so
Yeah,
easy.
one of the kids has appendicitis. The wife leaves town to go take care of the kid. He has to stay because he has a big business meeting that we never hear from again. And then two girls show up. We get Jackson, played by Sandra Locke, and Donna, played by Colleen Camp. They show up. They're like, oh, no, we're lost. Can we use your phone? This makes more sense because it's not 2015 and there's only landlines. And so they end up having a threesome with him in his, again, the hot tub in his like health spa Marin County bathroom. And then when they get up in the morning, the girls refuse to leave. They eventually tie him up and kind of psychologically torture him, kind of as revenge ultimately, like for giving into temptation, or at least that's kind of the sense that you get the sense that this is something that they do. That they try to tempt a man and then they'll kind of punish him for fucking them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of that's what that is.
That's kind of the point. It's a sexploitation home invasion thriller, with an extra big dose of 70s aesthetic signifiers.
Oh, very much so. Which, I mean, just tip my hand, definitely helped for me.
Oh yeah, no. It's let us lay it out there. I don't think either one of us would even hesitate a microsecond in saying this is a better film than Knock Knock.
Oh, absolutely. And even considering how much the text is almost exactly the same, this is such a considerably better movie.
It's a considerably better movie, and while the text is the same, the subtext or the meta text, or I don't know how we want to describe it, and we'll get there. One thing felt different to me that made the entire story work better.
Oh.
And we'll get there. But I want to start with the croquet scene.
Yes, please.
Because, boy, this movie is not... It is not slowing down. It is like, okay, 1970s, here we go. Boom, 70s. That croquet scene, well, it's a croquet scene. So, like, okay, this is where we were culturally. And, you know, croquet lives on in all of our hearts. I've played croquet within the last 4 years, probably. But, something about this particular game of croquet just feels extra 70s. It is shot exclusively in the form of either close-ups of their feet or extreme wide shots. The dialogue has extremely obviously been dubbed.
Oh, very much. It's like an Italian movie.
It's like an Italian movie. It is routinely the case that we're watching a wide shot of the characters and we hear the wife talking, and like there's not even an indication that she's looking at him or that her mouth is moving, and it feels sort of like watching an old Popeye cartoon where they just kind of like have olive oil like talking over a shot of just like people walking down the street or whatever. Just felt, and it's all gauzy and sun dappled, and it felt so like the movie's telling you right now. It is not easing you into it. It's saying this is what you get to deal with. You are either on this page or you are not. And that helps me. That helps me get to where the film wants me to be very quickly when it just kind of pulverizes me with a meat hammer like that.
Yeah, and it's also very obvious that every line of dialogue they speak is foreshadowing in some way.
Oh, yes.
Which is like, oh, you're always in a corner, George. And then he's like, and she's like beating him at croquet, and he's like, but you're my wife. And she's like, not while we're playing a game, George.
Yes. He's also, on the subject of nothing at all, he is the single worst croquet player I've seen in my entire life. Like at one point he needs to swing the ball, and he like takes this big swing and the ball rolls like 9 inches. And this isn't like him doing one of those little taps because he wants to get it in place. Like he's wailing on the ball and he still somehow doesn't get it to go.
That's because he's an impotent man, Tim.
This is what I'm saying. He doesn't know how to use that hammer.
He's got a big swinging dick and doesn't have the the ability. But anyway, yeah, I loved this scene. It was wild. And come to think of it, since we're talking about the wide shots, do we ever get a close-up of the wife? Do you think it's like an intentionally kind of distancing, keeping her away?
We get at least one medium shot because there is one. I was watching for it. There is absolutely one scene where we see her talking. It's a single. We see her mouth move. Her mouth lines up to the words she is saying, more or less. It was still very clearly dubbed, but like at least it was dubbed relatively well. So yes, we get at least one medium single of the wife.
Okay. Yeah, because
which almost feels like it's a mistake, to be honest, given how hard the aesthetic is going.
Yeah, maybe so. But she does have a little bit of plot to deliver before she fucks off and doesn't appear again. But yeah, no, you're right. It's this kind of like gauzy, dreamlike, just bizarre approach where the movie's kind of, it's floaty but also threatening at the same time, and that is a vibe that it will continue to have, and that I think is incredibly valuable, just for the thing that it's doing, especially because it's so simple. It's brutishly simple. There's not a lot going on. There's certainly more on its mind than in Knock Knock, but it's relatively simple. It's very repetitive in terms of incident. I was getting a little sick of it by the third act, but I do think aesthetically, sonically, visually, it's really pulling out a lot of stops and doing interesting stuff.
It for sure is, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot because there's a lot of it. But sort of to the greater point you just raised, more on its mind than Knock Knock for sure. It's coming at a point in society's development where I think the story is more thorny in a lot of ways. Because it's very much in a way that I don't think I feel resolved on, and you'll see, critics try to kind of say, is this, it's that. It's about women's lib. It's definitely about like the sexual revolution has happened. I don't know if I think the movie thinks this is all a good or bad thing to have happened, and I don't know. It's hard. There's parts of it where it feels very much like the man is getting his comeuppance, rightfully so, and there's a lot of it where it's like, this is what happens when you trust women, man. Like, it's a very weird thing, but it's clearly about like the new sexual norms of the mid-70s. Knock Knock, of course, is just about like Eli Roth thinks girls are nasty.
Yeah, it's about boobs pressed against glass.
Yeah, exactly. So that's that. The thing that I was kind of wondering though, as I was watching it, and especially as I was done with it, I really, not that we would have ever done it this way, I really wish I'd seen this before Knock Knock, because I also felt that thing you're describing where like by the end of the 90 minutes, it's not a long movie, I'm like done with it.
Yeah.
Like it's like, okay, there were not 90 minutes of scenes here. But I also feel, since it's really closer to being the end of my 3 hours with it, if I would have responded to this film better if Knock Knock hadn't kind of spoiled it for me.
I don't know. I mean, I will say, obviously, in our Knock Knock episode, we talked about the way that the final shot of this movie is completely different from how Knock Knock ends. So at least maybe it packs slightly more of a punch if it comes at the end of 3 hours and you kind of already know the beats of what has come before. Although we did both know that it was coming. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, it's in that sense, yeah. I mean, maybe we should have watched this first, but I don't know. What kind of profile does this movie have if Knock Knock doesn't exist? Because I wouldn't have heard of it, I don't think.
I mean, it has 3 actors who do have fan bases in their own very distinct ways. I don't think the Seymour Cassel fan base wants Death Game, but there are people. I mean, he's a John Cassavetes guy, right? So like he's in the world. He was in at least a couple Wes Anderson films. He's Jason Schwartzman's dad in Rushmore. And I mean, obviously, Wes Anderson is casting him because of the John Cassavetes thing, because he's a big deal in the sort of early period Cassavetes films. So I think that like his name attached to this gets people in the door potentially. Also, Sandra Locke is such a distinct figure in American film history, in that directly following this shoot, this was her last movie before she kind of hooked up professionally and personally with Clint Eastwood. And this was released actually after the first of their collaborations, but it was shot prior. It had a whole just like tormented path through post-production. The director and producer were apparently just real pieces of work on Death Game. So Sandra Locke kind of bursts onto the scene in the late 60s, gets an Oscar nomination right out of the gate for Hard as a Lonely Hunter, and never really pays off that promise, in part because the Clint Eastwood situation just turned so vindictive. I don't know how much of her life story are you familiar with?
None of it. So you can tell me.
Okay. So basically, she and Eastwood lived together. They never married. They were both married to other people for many, many years, but they were like understood to be kind of a domestic partnership. And basically, the way that their relationship worked is she would always get the female lead in every Clint Eastwood movie that he made during their relationship. And he was a huge, huge star, so this was great for her profile. But at the same time, not every one of his films had a female lead. And he sort of was actively discouraging her from taking other roles. So she wasn't really in movies. I think she did some TV work. After their split, which was not a pleasant one, because I don't think anyone ever had a like harmonious split from Clint Eastwood, the story gets complicated. There's a lot of he said, she said. She did sue him, and the court seems to have found more in favor of her version of the story than his. So I think we can assume she's being correct here. Basically, she wanted to break into directing, and he found this so annoying. He basically was funneling money through a shell company so that it would look like Warner Brothers was paying her. It was actually Eastwood was paying her, but shutting down all of the projects she was trying to pitch. So she didn't understand what was going on for a while, because she was like, well, I'm drawing money from Warner's, and like they're happy to have me on contract, but for some reason they're not letting me direct anything. It was basically that Eastwood was like thwarting her directorial career and paying her for the privilege of doing so, because he was that anxious to make sure she did not have a subsequent career. So Clint Eastwood, decent human being, yes or no? The world may never know. But
It's Clint Eastwood,
but yeah, so
come on.
it's Clint Eastwood, exactly. No, so Sandra Locke's career is just this bizarre like series of nightmare encounters with Clint Eastwood, basically. But so she does have a profile from the Clint Eastwood films. She's quite good in them. So I think that people know her and sort of regard her career as a great what if, because she basically stops being involved in the movies after she and Eastwood split, because he like sabotages her. But I think this is a kind of interesting artifact, as one of the very small number of features she's in that Clint Eastwood is not attached to in any capacity. Although, weirdly, a draft of this film was written by one of Clint Eastwood's screenwriter, Joe Hyams. So, like, it does have a sort of weird pseudo-Eastwood connection even before the two of them had met up. But, yeah, it's I think Sandra Locke's presence in it would also make people aware that it exists, but not necessarily give it a profile, to get us back to where we were like 30 minutes ago.
Okay, no, that was interesting though.
I just find Sandra Locke to be a fascinating character. She's I think a very interesting presence in the world.
Yeah, and we'll probably get to we'll get to this as well, but she's very interesting in this movie.
Yes.
And she's also acting, opposite Colleen Camp, who's Colleen Camp is the person that I know best going into this movie. She was in the Ira Levin adaptation Sliver with Sharon Stone.
Oh, sure.
She gets to utter the immortal line about how she's masturbated so much she's going to get a plastic yeast infection.
That's a good line.
But yeah, and Colleen Camp was, if I recall correctly, the only person from Death Game to make a cameo on screen in Knock Knock.
She is the only person to make a cameo on screen, although Sandra Locke and Peter Traynor, who is the director of this film, were both involved.
Yeah.
I don't recall the exact capacity in which they were involved, but they were both involved.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been like vanity producer credits, because if I recall correctly, Eli Roth was trying to get the money that they didn't get from Death Game, perhaps.
Okay.
I don't think that probably worked out very well, because Knock Knock did not get a substantial release. But anyway, so we all the way back to we were talking about the plot. You were saying there was kind of one thing that you felt like kind of crystallized and made this work more for you than Knock Knock. What was that thing?
It is the scene where the girls seduce the guy. In this film, and it's partially because it's of how it's staged and partially because it's of how it's shot. I feel that George is much more of a willing participant in the sex act. And in Knock Knock, it very much feels like they're sort of forcing sex on Keanu. And so if I buy that his, like, no, I don't want to do this is coming from an insincere place, which in this film I do. I think that he's really not trying very hard to stave off these girls. Everything that happens subsequently to him feels much more like a judgment and much less like we are telling a movie and this is how the movie is going.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and that does make it more of a complicated story because this is time to talk about this because obviously there's a way, as you said, there's a way to read this as a kind of feminist movie, and there's a way to read it as very much not that. And I was shocked. So I read a review. So I have a book called Horror Movies of the 1970s by John Kenneth Muir, not the bird guy, a different John Muir, who's a very smart reviewer who I don't always agree with, and he very much views this as a feminist movie, particularly because of the monologue that Colleen Camp gives, where it's kind of implied that she was perhaps abused by her own father. And then obviously kind of compounded with the good old dad song that is laboriously repeated throughout this movie.
Ooh, yeah, this song.
You look like you were about to throw up when I mentioned this song.
I was.
But for me, I mean, like you said, it's so obviously about women's lib in the 70s. But to me, I don't know. I certainly didn't read it as a feminist text in any way. It very much felt to me like, well, it's a sense of like, this is a man who has transgressed against his wife, and he is being punished for it, but it's because women be crazy. And it's very much like the idea that women's sexual liberation is literally tearing apart the structure of the home. And I was like, I just don't see a way I don't find a way out of that metaphor for me to find a feminist message in this movie. But I don't know, how are you feeling watching it?
Like I said, part of it, I felt like George was more the architect of his own fate in this one. I don't think I would ever say, never go so far as to call it a feminist film, although I do think it is. There are ways to argue that it is a film on the girl's side, and that it is a film that is not. And I think that's different than saying it's a feminist film. But George feeling more complicit, I think, changes the way it feels to me. And also compared to Knock Knock, the fact that he has a wife and children, like, who are going to be coming back soon, just does not feel like a present thing in this movie. So the sense of the two tormentors kind of ripping apart this well-built family just doesn't land for me, and I don't think the film is trying to make it land. So it's a different vibe. I think it's a vibe that's much more sort of willing to let the guy just sit there and stew and suffer. And, like, obviously we don't want him to die in theory. Like, he hasn't transgressed that much. But I do think that argument is there. Now, I would also say any argument that this is on the girl's side, any argument that this is trying to say, no, what they're doing is righteous, does not survive contact with the scene with the grocery delivery boy.
No, certainly not. Because
yeah,
at that point, it's just like, nope, you're crazy.
They're just crazy people who like killing. And so that, I think, is as much as any other specific reason why I hear... And Muir is not the first person to try and mount a feminist or, quasi-feminist defense of this movie. I don't buy it. And that scene is probably the reason why, if I bought everything else, and I don't, but if I did, I would still have to get to that scene and be like, no, this is not a scene that is giving us any way to sympathize with the women.
No, certainly not. But the fact that the movie, I mean, it's not very clear or concise in its messaging, which doesn't necessarily mean that...
Oh, I mean, I like that about it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That's what I was saying. That's not necessarily a qualitative judgment. That is true about the movie, but it's giving you enough that there's something going on underneath the story.
Yeah. And I think part of why I like that it has such a confused sense of what its own themes are, and as you say, it's not concise. It's like, I kind of like the idea of this guy, so the director is
Peter Traynor.
Comes after a lot of different screenwriters, both men and women. Joe Hyams, Eastwood screenwriter, is a woman, for example. A lot of people have sort of poked at the screenplay, so it's hard to say like whose screenplay we're watching really. But it definitely feels like it comes from a place of I am a guy and women's lib has just happened and everything got really complicated and I don't know what it is yet. And like I like that feeling of like shit be complicated, yo. Like that sort of just like a movie just like trying to grab things and be like I'm trying to make any sense of this huge seismic shift in society and I can't do it. I get excited by that. So I like that this movie doesn't feel to me like it has a message about feminism. It's just sort of like, wow, feminism is really tough for me to get my head around. And that's, to me, that's cool. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, and that reading of the movie is very much supported by the fact that, well, this character's name is George Manning. It's like, he is, the stand-in for manhood and manness. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to dig into. I don't think there's not a way to solve the movie, but that's not necessarily what you need to do with any movie,
exactly.
let alone one that's
I like movies that you can't solve. I think that's where you find, not that this is art, but I think that's where you find art as a filmmaker who's just like, I was trying to grapple. Maybe you can make something out of this pile of things I was grappling with.
I think Death Game is art. I think it has a very intentionally disorienting and discomforting. Its goal is to make you feel that way, and I think it accomplishes that very much aesthetically, just through everything that it does.
Yeah, and I mean certainly, like it is the way it's made is very. This is going to be a weird way to frame it. Sandra Locke is someone who, at this point in her career, was trying to make serious, weird art movies, and then for some reason she plopped into Outlaw Josie Wales, and that ended. But it feels like the kind of movie that someone whose like thing is I want to make complicated, interesting, arty movies would be okay with being part of this production, because it is just the way it's been assembled is drawing so much from this kind of avant-garde would be pushing it, but like the editing and the camera tricks are all very strange. And certainly I think the sex scene, which again is a big part of the reason that I like this more than Knock Knock, it's a very porny sex scene. Like we don't see anything, but there's like this like literal Bamba Chicka Waka Chicka.
Oh yeah, very 70s
playing.
Porno music.
It's great. And also the scene itself is just full of these like 2 and 3 layer cross dissolves. So we see like an arm crossing through a head and it's all dissolved. And it feels very, very like art smutty. I don't know how much of the like Euro porn, like the whatever they call it, like sort of porno chic films being made in Europe at this time. It feels like it's aware that they exist. And those films are, even though they're porn, they're very like, well, we're the French and we're not going to make a pleasurable movie about sex. We're going to make this very strange, visually impressionistic film about like fragmentary moments of sex. And like, it feels like that to me.
Yeah, it abstracts it beyond the point of eroticism. At least for me, because I'm not attracted to cis women. I am not particularly attracted to Seymour Cassel. So I don't have a vested interest in what is going on screen as far as the threesome. But no, I think it's just not effectively erotic on purpose.
I was going to say, as someone who's attracted to all three, but I love you, Seymour Cassel. I think you're great in those Cassavetes movies. I would not.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Not with that mustache, certainly.
And that's the thing. He should have known something was up, because you got to be honest about what you're bringing to the table. And this threesome's not happening if there's not an ulterior motive.
Which is also honestly part of why I think this is better than Knock Knock. Like, do I believe that 2 groupies would try to bang Keanu Reeves? I sure do. Do I believe that 2 groupies would try to bang like extra sweaty Seymour Cassel? I just don't.
No, I mean, I obviously in the 70s a mustache is going to take you like a lot of the way there, but it's just not so much for me. He's very rich is the thing. That's where the candelabra is the stand-in for,
obviously,
for his potency.
I do feel, unless you had somewhere you wanted to take this, we should talk about the song.
Okay, let's talk about the song, Tim.
Because the song is not an incidental part of this movie.
No, it's not.
And I think the song is part of where it's like very complicated relationship to George comes from. So the song's name is My Good Old Dad. and it is an original. I spent some time trying to crack what's going on in this movie. So it was written for this film. It was not performed by a band as such. It was performed by I believe, Ron Hinklin singers.
Yeah, a group of session musicians.
A group of session musicians whose thing was basically, you need vocal work in your movie soundtrack. Well, we'll provide it for you. And so it's this kind of ersatz band that never was, and the song feels the same way, because like you listen to it, and I at least don't think the late 70s. I'm hearing this was like a one-hit wonder British invasion band from like 65 that had the track that got to like number 60 on the top 100 in the US has been long forgotten, because there is this weird insistence that they're affecting British accents. They're sort of using British like vocabulary, not consistently, but I think more than you would if you weren't trying to make this happen. And the music is this just horrible, I think, just absolutely unlistenable, sort of like calliope, hurdy-gurdy British music hall thing. So it feels like this kind of weird Georgie Girl era.
Oh, I love Georgie Girl. As the song.
Don't not love Georgie Girl. I think Georgie Girl wipes the floor with My Good Old Dad. Let's be clear about that.
Also, because Georgie Girl is kind of a savage song. It's a very mean to the Georgie Girl.
Well, that's the thing. And that's kind of what gets me to My Good Old Dad, which is this kind of very ironic, if you want it to be. So it's from the perspective of a woman, probably in her teens, it's not quite made clear, singing about how her dad has taught her all the things she knows, because he's a little staid and conservative, but ultimately he's looking out for her well-being. Like, that's the text of the song. But like, it's kind of the spin being put on the lyrics by the singers, and also some of the subtext of the lines, it's clearly saying, you know, dad is a bit too handsy and is actually a very terrible father who, as you know, that's the vibe you get from the song. At least that's the vibe I got.
Yeah. Well, because it's very much the sense of the song is like, who's the one who taught me to wash my hair, or you know, whatever. And it's like
yes,
talking about, there's a part where it says like, and always faithful to mom. And there's a part,
always faithful to mom is clearly ironic. And then there's one about like, he makes me get on my knees and praise the Lord.
Yep, that's the one.
That's the one. And there's also a line about spanking.
Oh, yep. Spanks me when
so
I've
like
been
it's
bad.
It's this very weird combination of, is it like a young woman singing about her lover who she calls daddy, or is it an actual teenage girl singing about her father? Because the line about mom sort of pins it to that. But it's definitely dad is gross. But you sort of have to, and it feels like it ties into the movie in the sense of like George is both this put upon victim, but also kind of a sleaze bucket, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. And the song gets used a lot, and that's why I think we have to sort of understand why the song is there, because I was not able to ignore the song's omnipresence in the soundtrack.
No, it is used way too much. I will say, so the sensibility of the song itself, like I know it's giving you, you know, that 60s British thing, but to me it kind of took me back even earlier. Like maybe not the instrumentation of it, but it kind of reminded me of like what like a song Baby Jane would sing, like the I Wrote a Letter to Daddy, child vaudeville kind of vibe. But maybe, you know, updated for the 60s or whatever, where that instrumentation is coming from. Where it's just like this kind of sickly sweet, like dripping down your throat, just really gross saccharine song.
Sure.
But it's so obviously this like nasty, ironic underscore to what's going on, even before you know what's going on, when it's just playing over the opening credits.
Which it does so at great length. The opening credits are only 3 minutes long, but they're the 3 longest minutes I've sat through in a long time.
I did not hate the song in the way that you seem to. I was sick of it by the 3rd time it plays in full in the movie, but because it's
by which time it has also shown up in an instrumental form in the underscore at least twice, I might add.
Yep. No, they are really leaning
I was
in.
counting. Yeah, I think in general, I am someone for whom the music in a film has a disproportionate impact on my experience of that film. This is a movie that that one song, is easily a half star, if not a full star demerit to my feelings about the movie. I really, really, really hated the song a lot.
Okay, so do you feel like because I feel like it sort of works in the context of what this movie is doing, because I do feel like the movie is in general just a barrage of unpleasant things.
I think it works in the context of what the movie is doing for sure. I just find it an unpleasant object.
That is totally fair.
Like it would be to take it back to Eli Roth in Cannibal Holocaust. It would be like saying the turtle scene in a Cannibal Holocaust works in the context that they needed it to work in, but I don't wish to look at it.
No, I totally get that, and that's a matter of taste, because this song didn't bother, like, it bore into my soul in the way that it seems to have.
I'm saying I would rather watch a turtle be butchered alive than listen to this song again. That's not entirely true. Listen to it the 5 times it shows up in the movie, probably, but not listen to it once.
Yeah, no, it's a rough time. But speaking of, like, this movie is doing a lot of interesting things with its soundscape other than the song. Like,
absolutely,
there is a moment where I believe it's Sandra Locke's character has, like, turned on every audio device in the sitting room and is just lounging on this Barca lounger listening to. Okay, I'm so sorry. A pencil just rolled out from underneath my desk like a ghost pushed it.
On the subject of a soundscape that is just completely distracting and making it impossible to focus on your brain's processes.
Yeah, did you hear it? It wasn't loud enough?
No.
Okay, no. Okay, great. Sorry, I'm losing my goddamn mind. Anyway, so yeah, she's listening to all this, like, music and talk radio and everything at once. But you don't know that this is happening at first, because it is just, the shot is holding on this bottle of spilled ketchup from when they have been very messily eating breakfast and just, like, totally destroying his breakfast table. And the shot's holding on this static shot of the spilled bottle, and all of these competing noises are happening at once. And I was watching this through my television, but it was playing on my computer that I had plugged into the TV because I had to get a free trial of AMC Plus to watch it.
You see, I watched it on Rare Film with 2Ms.com.
Ooh, fun.
Yes.
But I thought, like, do I have another window open somewhere on my computer and it's playing 8 different things? It's very disorienting, and you think something has gone wrong.
It's so discombobulating, especially because of that shot of the ketchup, which just holds so fucking long. And it's not even like we're watching the ketchup, like, languorously drip out of the ketchup bottle. Like, it's just we're just looking at the ketchup bottles, like, spout. And I was like, again, I'm watching it on this kind of slightly janky website. I'm like, did it freeze? Is there something wrong here? So the whole thing just sort of breaks your brain, because you don't really want to look at what you're looking at. It's kind of super gross. The more you're just staring at ketchup is kind of like congealing in the morning sun. And then this it's just like barrage of, like, at least 5 or 6 different sources of sound. It is a very, very effective way at sort of getting you to feel something is just horrible. And it's kind of the moment that really starts to tip the girls from, here are these weird, sexy teenagers who just showed up and had hot sex with Seymour Cassell, to, like, there's something very disturbing and wrong about the way this. I mean, we already kind of feel like because of the breakfast sequence, but, like, it's where the movie pivots over to, these aren't just, like, weird kids. These are, like, dangerous lunatics, potentially. And I feel like that's a great way for the film to kind of, like, work on your body in a way that serves the story.
Yeah, and they do this in a lot of different ways. There are scenes that are just made much more potent by the kind of weirdness or intensity of it. Like, there's a part where Sandra Locke is kind of screaming and smacking Seymour Cassell, and it's really unsettling. And
that's for sure.
It's pretty basic. I mean, that's performance-based, too, because this is a haunted performance that Sandra Locke is doing.
Yeah. Like, Cassell and Camp are both good. Again, these are all 3, like, actual actors here. Locke is like on some level in this film. It is wild. Like there's basically two phases to her performance based on whether or not she's wearing those terrifying caterpillar eyebrows.
Oh my god, yeah.
But even before she does that, so late in the movie, she like does these like big curly Q. I'm drawing on my face, like you can see me on the podcast. But these like sort of curly Q'd eyebrow shapes above her actual eyebrows. They look like antenna, kind of, and it's just like this like demonic face mask, basically, that she's wearing for the entire second half of the movie. But even before that, she has such a gaunt. She's got such a great face for movies. Like it's so gaunt and like cheekbone dominated, and her eyes like just look like these terrified kitten saucers just floating in her like pointy little head. And excuse me. So like she has this, as you say, very haunted look. It's very she's staring through you. Like when we see her eyes, like she's just, it's wild performance. And then when she does go into these sort of more physically aggressive moments, there's just this animalism, really. Like it's just such a violent, like raging, screaming and sputtering in a way that you almost sort of can't parse human speech out of it. Like not even that you can't figure out what the words are. It doesn't feel like words are being formed. So no, really terrifying performance. I think easily the thing about this movie that, in at least a conventional sense, works the hardest to push it towards being sort of a very terrifying, well, not very terrifying, but like insofar as it is a terrifying thriller, like I think her performance is really, really, really a big part of why it just feels so aggressive and unpredictable and ghostly.
Yeah, and if not for timeline and for Clint Eastwood, I could very easily see her getting the role of Carrie White off of this performance. Yeah, it's just, I mean, Carrie White's obviously more mousy than that, but like she could do it. There's just something uncanny and off-putting inside this.
And I think that's kind of built into the Sondra Locke experience. One of the reasons that we sort of have to rely on court documents and whatnot to parse out who is at fault here in the Eastwood Locke war. Sondra Locke's a very strange character. She persisted in like denying, not in the way that like movie stars deny how old they are. Like she was like insisting on playing teenage ingenue roles. She's like 32 at the point this movie's in production. And that was kind of one of the things that was like important to her in her career, was like not ever aging past these like waifish teenager roles. And she has the build for it. Like I don't not believe her as a teenager, but there's also, I think, definitely a feeling of she's like literally twice the age of her character. So there is this kind of uncanny tickle in the back of your head.
Totally. And also, I mean, I think that also helps the text of the movie as well, because I don't, just like in Knock Knock, you're not really sure if they're telling the truth about being underage, or about anything. Because anything they say you have to take with a grain of salt of like, what the fuck is going on?
Absolutely.
And yeah, she inhabits that kind of ethereal creepster vibe very well. But obviously, and then like, even though the third act gets a little boring, I think it's still aesthetically up to a very solid level. Like a lot of that act when he's all tied up is drenched in this kind of green aquarium light.
The lighting is so good.
It's
because like the plot snaps when he tries to take them to the Greyhound station.
Yes.
But also some of the weirdest imagery happens after that, and I think that does keep it from just completely falling apart.
Yeah, and when,
because that's also when she does the makeup, is also in that section.
She does the makeup, and she's wearing this kind of like almost like top hat and tails kind of outfit at one point. Or is that Colleen Camp? One of them's wearing that.
No, that's her. Because at the end, actually, is it Colleen Camp? I don't remember. Because I latched onto it in the final sequence, like the last scene, where whoever's wearing it keeps like popping it closed and then like popping it out as they're walking, and the music is being very jangly and loud. So even after the movie's kind of resolved in a sense, like it's still like this top hat prop is just really remarkably weird and upsetting.
Yeah, it's just and it's just very interesting that just the look of it, and they're holding this very literal mock trial where they're like pretending to put him on trial and saying like the horrible things they'll say that they'll blame him for and whatnot. And that is just so well accentuated by what they're wearing and the kind of The way that they're wearing normal clothes but twisting them in this weird way and then adding different bits and bobs that just completely change the context of it. I liked this movie way more than I was expecting to.
Same. I was, expecting sexploitation version of Knock Knock, and it is so much better than that. Those performances during that trial sequence, like, it increasingly just feels like these are two, again, I already used the word demons, but it feels like malevolent spirits wearing people suits and not wearing them very well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that ties in with the opening epigraph, I guess. That's afterwards, right? I don't remember. But there's a opening text on the screen that says something about how, like, this is based on true story because it's the 70s. But it's a reminder of how man cannot insulate himself from the pervasive evil of the world.
Oh, you're right. That did happen. So that is an epigraph, kind of. Epigraph, I think, is technically a quote.
Okay.
So that's more just like a sort of preamble. But I was expecting, because I had no idea what to expect of this movie, like social themes, and I still, having seen it, don't understand what to expect of that. I was expecting some sort of like suburbanites fleeing urban crime thing based on that line, which is not really at all what this is. But there is also, I think, a sense of it being the suburbs won't save you, having a fabulously wealthy Marin County house with like a bathroom whose spa section is the size of my entire apartment won't help you. So there is, even though it's not, I think, about white flight, there's at least a sort of the suburbs are dangerous vibe in there.
Yeah, very, very, very much. But I think the idea of, I mean, talk as much as we want about the different ways that this presents any sort of like women's lib messaging. It is positioning these women as the pervasive evil that he is encountering.
Sure.
And I think that is very clear in the way they are embodying these characters. They're this kind of unknowable, unpredictable, terrifying, brutal women, which I love. Go them.
Well, and that's part of what's complicated about it, is I feel like this is the one window in time where you could be like, this is a movie about two demons from hell tormenting a suburban man, and it is plausible, for us to be rooting from the demons because it's the 70s.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean,
it's a period of nihilism and assuming that evil ought to win, basically.
Yeah, but then spoiler alert for the very end. What do you make of the fact that they get run over by a car at the end and die, and the credits roll over a freeze frame of them being murdered by a car?
I mean, I love the shot that is elected to use as a freeze frame. It's had this like sort of color replacement filter put on, so it's all like weird looking and purple. They struggled to end this movie. Apparently there were 4 different scripted endings. And I feel like you can feel that. It's kind of strange and arbitrary. Any ending would have felt a little arbitrary, I think. But like, there is that great, great, great shot leading up to this where it's just the two of them walking down the sidewalk. And again, the one of them, I can't remember who, is popping the top hat over and over again, which feels of a piece with the whole movie. I do feel to an extent that they get run over by a car is just we needed a way out of this type thing.
Probably. And it does feel like a little just the nihilistic 70s of just like,
oh, absolutely.
No one is free of the just grungy awfulness of reality.
I also really loved, and I might be misremembering Knock Knock, I feel like Knock Knock gives us a sort of moment to be with Keanu after they leave, where he just kind of takes stock of how thoroughly his world has just been gutted by this experience.
Yeah, because the end of Knock Knock, he is buried up to his head in the backyard, and they have published a video of him fucking one of the girls while she's dressed as his daughter onto his Facebook, and he's like watching the comments come in.
That's right. And I love that this version of the story, just once they leave, once they're like done with George, he's just done. Like we don't get to spend a second with him. Yeah. After the two women abandon him to whatever happens next. I think that's also nihilistic in that very distinctly 70s.
Yeah, that's very 70s. Like that thing where The Hills Have Eyes ends the second the plot is over.
Yep.
Or like the Texas Chainsaw
Texas
thing where it
Chainsaw.
ends before the plot has ended almost.
Basically.
Yeah. Ugh. It's just, I mean, there's something so spicy and bracing about that. I do like that. I mean, this is totally different, but I do also love the ending of the original Michael Caine, The Italian Job, where the bus is like hanging over the edge of a cliff. And he's like, I've got a plan. And then it just cuts.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's obviously like a gag as well. But no, there's so many films we could point to. Like, the entire Italian horror industry at this point in time is basically all about, is this the literal earliest frame we can freeze and have the credits roll? Great.
Yeah.
Like, and there's something really wonderful about that sort of roughness and that sense of just like the movie kind of punches us in the balls as it's leaving us to go out the theater.
It feels like you've crashed your car into something and you're being thrown bodily out of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
They grabbed you by the scruff of your neck.
And this is, I mean, there's something to be said for, movies that kind of ease us out and movies that let us reflect as the credits are rolling. But I do really love this ethos of just, we're done, go. And just like, it's brutal. And these are brutal stories. So I like that about it.
Yeah, no, Death Game's a good
As for
movie.
them getting run over by the car, though, I don't know. It had the feeling of this was the one that was the chair that was open when the music stopped playing. We just needed to find some way out of this story.
Yeah, because it's not like a triumphant, like they're getting theirs. It's just a thing that happens.
It's just a thing that happens. And there is this sense of like, so even after all that, they didn't actually get anything out of it. They're just going to die pointlessly. And it's just, so the whole thing just feels, it was all such a pointless, nihilistic stretch of 2 days in all of these people's lives. And again, I think that's part of what the impact of it is. So I like that about it. I still feel like the ending was basically random.
Yeah.
It does not feel like the movie was building up to that ending.
No, certainly not. And you don't have enough of a sense of these girls to even know what they're losing, really.
Right.
But that's fine. It's just interesting. There's a lot of stuff on the page where it's like, I don't know what to make of that. But just as a cinematic experience, I recommend this movie quite a bit. I
do too. I believe it was restored not all that long ago for Blu-ray, which is actually probably the version you saw. The version I saw was most certainly not restored. Which kind of actually feels good.
Yeah.
This kind of movie, but like there is, my understanding, a very fancy new Blu-ray by Grindhouse releasing that I am pondering. It's one of those like niche exploitation film Blu-rays, so it's like $60 or whatever it is, so I probably won't buy it. But I think it is worth seeing if you can track down.
It's on Shudder. It's on
capacity.
AMC Plus.
There you go. Because no, it's definitely got a lot going on, and I will say, as much as I was just not into Knock Knock, I'm glad that Knock Knock existed and that we engaged with it, because it opened the door to me seeing this much more interesting and tough and weird movie, and in some ways more beautiful. Like there's some very interesting cinematography in this movie. Well,
because Knock Knock kind of just sands the serial numbers off and then updates it a little bit for the 21st century.
Like Knock Knock begins, and the appeal of Knock Knock begins and ends with the free pizza monologue.
Absolutely.
And this movie doesn't have that. Like, it doesn't have a moment that feels like memeable the way that free pizza is, but it has just 90 minutes of being or at least let's say 80 or 70 minutes of being actually like it gets in your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
And I like that. That's what I want.
And I think it is an example of the way, and obviously this story came first, but it is technically a retelling of a different story. It's an example of the way that aesthetic approach can completely change what a movie is.
100%. Because plot-wise, there's not a lot of daylight between the two films, but aesthetically, this one's just such a different texture and flows differently, makes me feel differently about the characters. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, any last words on Death Game before we kind of wrap up?
I think that covers it. Good time. Again, I'm actually probably a 3.5 star, but I've peeled back a half star just because of that goddamn song. If it was only in the opening credits, I'd be like, whatever, get through the opening credits. It just keeps coming back.
That is so funny, because I feel like I'm in the Tim seat right now, where I'm just like, oh well, this annoying thing works for me on the basis of being annoying, because normally I would push back against that. So this must be really, really under your skin. I love it.
I love though that you are having. So see, isn't that a wonderful experience to have? And do you understand why I bring it to so many movies?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But see, I think you are more in the habit of defending stuff that is boring so you can feel bored, and that is not my vibe.
That's fair. This is annoying. This is annoying and upsetting more than it's boring. So I get that.
It is not boring, for sure.
It is not boring. Well, there's a little bit of time after the Greyhound station where it has gotten
the song is not boring.
Sluggish. The song is not boring. The song is not boring.
In the movie is fine. It has its lulls, but any movie does. Pretty much.
Sure.
Anyway, that's going to be that on Death Game in 1977. Oh, that's the same year that Star Wars came out. That's just something to think about. Anyway, if you want to catch us next month in February, the Oscar nominations are going to be out. So we are going to be doing our annual kind of a digging up of skeletons out of the closets of people who are nominated for those Oscars, like we did with Knock Knock with Ana de Armas. It's always exciting to see the previous kind of slumming work that now respected actors have done. So that's always I love this. I love this month, so I'm excited for it.
Absolutely. So yeah, by the time this episode goes live, the nominations will already be out. So we'll probably have a poll up. So if you're a Patreon, you should certainly hop over and vote.
Very much so. Yeah, and thank you so much for listening. Find more of this podcast, reviews, and everything else at alternateending.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.